think we have time for a few questions. 1 minute or so. No. If you're not comfortable in asking in English, you can ask in Portuguese, and then se não estiverem confortáveis de fazer a pergunta em inglês, podem fazer em português e eu traduzo.
Thank you very much for very interesting presentations. And my question, what is, I don't know to whom exactly, but maybe, what is an average delay between the PISA results and the policies as a response to those results? Because, for example, on the time diagram that we had in the beginning, for example, we have like PISA results 2012, but we know that they were only published in 2013.
Oh, okay.
Then probably the policies as a response also take time to discuss, to think about, to implement, would be probably at least 2014 or 15. And then in Portuguese case, there is a new government with the new pack of the reforms. So yes, what is the time frame, the delay, and then the delay of those policies, for example, that were implemented, when we can see the results like in PISA?
Yeah.
This is the question.
Yeah, that's I think we can answer right away. It's an excellent question. There is some information, what is the time lag, that's how we call it, for the policies and then see the results. And it really depends on the type of policy. For example, an high-stake exam, you see it like 3 years after. On the next cycle, you'll see the effect. And it's not only for Portugal. There is this very well-known economist from the United States, Eric Hanushek. He has done this study with all PISA countries, and he shows, that introduction of high-stake exams actually shows up in the next cycle. But if you're talking about like curriculum changes, if you start like we do in Portugal, like the new learning targets that enter in 2021, they don't enter all at the same year. So they start by the end of the cycles. And so it takes like at least 3-4 years for the policy to be transversal to all the school system. So then it takes more like 3 or even more years to see the effect of the curriculum changes on the international assessments. So it really depends on the policies. If it is something with consequence for the student, you generally see it on the next evaluation. But if it is things like curriculum and changes and digitalization of schools and things like that, then the effect is on the long term. I don't know if my colleagues want to say something about this. Yeah.
I would just say that the standard that I have heard is 6 years.
Yeah.
For any policy to be implemented.
6.
6.
Yeah. I think there was a question up there, and then there is another one here.
Hi. I would like to take this opportunity of having an international panel to ask.
Is the microphone on? I don't think it's on.
Hi. I would like to take this opportunity of having an international panel to ask, what is the ability of alignment in your own countries about long-term educational policies between across the political spectrum? Meaning, can you in your countries, are you able to agree on a long-term policies regarding specific issues at least? Thank you.
Yeah, very good question for you. You know the answer for Portugal, right?
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I can start for Ireland. In general, it's a bit of both. I think generally there's reasonable stability, and I think we maybe have been lucky in that respect in the last 10-15 years. As you saw, I mean, a 10-year strategy was brought in 2011, which has run through until just now because it was due to end in 2021, but obviously other things were also happening at that time, and a new 10-year strategy is just about to be launched. So obviously governments have changed in that time, and there have been 4 or 5 ministers of education in that time, but I mean the the Department of Education is a civil service machinery as well, and so I think sometimes priorities and emphases have changed and can change. I mean, the Minister for Education who brought in the first policy happened to be someone who was very keen on kind of target setting. I think he was kind of from an economics background by profession, so it very much came in with that emphasis of we want to set targets and be ambitious and reach them, and we want to measure things, and that's why Ireland joined Pearls and Tims in 2011, whereas we hadn't been doing Pearls and Tims for 15 years before that, but they were brought in as additional data sources. And that has been continued. We've maintained involvement in all these studies, and a lot of the changes that were brought in have taken place. But there have been some things like curriculum change. There was a big reform started in 2011 at that time as well, a complete kind of overhaul of, say, mathematics at post-primary level, and they wanted to bring in more continuous assessment of students year by year, rather than it all coming down to sort of one big exam after 3 years, which is what it was at the time. And there was a lot of pushback from teacher unions in particular, but also some discontent among parents and students, and worry about, will this change the relationship the teachers have with students? And the minister who was pushing that, eventually there was a change of government, or the minister changed, and the new minister who came in didn't want that fight to the same extent. And so that was sort of dropped a bit or rolled back, and so the kind of reform that was started in 2011 went through a few versions of planning over a few years and sort of eventually came in, but a much softer version of it a few years later. And that type of thing has happened, a few times. So, a new minister will come in and they don't want to pick the same fights that the previous minister did, and they might just let some things drop and focus on other areas. But by and large, things have sort of continued in the same direction across governments in Ireland.
And I think in Sweden, we had 2011, the same, that before that you didn't get a grade until the 7th grade. It was the first time the pupil got a grade, and we didn't have so much of national assessment. So there was a big change in politics, and it was a lot of fights around it. If you should evaluate students so much, if you should have the national assessments, and especially should the pupils get grades already in the 6th grade, and should they have national assessments already in the 3rd grade. So there was really a big change and debate, and I think you see the international ideology that is spreading. Otherwise, right now, I shouldn't say it so much, is how much the pupils should be involved in the democratic decisions at the school, and where some more focuses on the food, that if you are hungry, you can't learn. And some said if it's not calm in the classroom, you couldn't learn. Or if you have too much of digital devices and digital tools, you have to go back to basic and start to read and write on papers. So that's where the debate is right now. But otherwise, rather stable, I would say.
Yeah. Gunther, you want to comment?
I would just comment that for some of these decisions, you can use the school autonomy. For example, on the decision about the grades, if small children should receive the grade or not, it is up to school. It would not be given from the state saying this is a rule. So if the specific school thinks that this is how we want to have it, have it. So I think in that sense, some of the policies can be just given to the schools to decide because they know best what is their situation. But as I said about these big strategies in my presentation, it's good to have a big strategy to sort of to keep calm their life, so that there is not all the political interactions. And yes, and all kinds of indicators are nice to have. For example, we also had these indicators of, how many or how big shares of high performers we should have, which I don't know what they will do now because we're going the other way down. But it's good to have the documents, and it's good to have a peaceful life in letting it evolve.
Yeah, okay, great. There was a question here.
Since both Gunda and Joao had on their charts the GDP, the percentage of GDP spent on education, if someone knew nothing about the two countries, would it be safe to say that Estonia has maintained priority for education? Average GDP was about 6% at the beginning, at the end. In Portugal, if I remember, it reached a high of 5.1 and it's less than 3.3 now.
Yeah.
Does that signal anything?
Can I start?
Sure.
Yeah, actually I was looking at Gunda's presentation. I thought, there's a difference between Estonia and Portugal. Yeah, I do think so. I mean, the data analysis shows that there is not a really strong correlation between the amount that countries invest as a percentage of GDP. Louise in the morning show a different metric, like the cost per student. I think that at a certain level you see a strong correlation between either GDP or the cost per student, but after a certain level you don't see an effect. So it's not really the amount of money that you put on education, it's really how you spend that money.
I absolutely agree. So the school should not have a Steinway piano. They should just have a good piano. So in that sense, if you have a Steinway, the price goes up. There is a certain point until you how much you need, and then the effectiveness or what you do with the money is probably the question.
Okay, there's a question over there. Isabel? I don't know. Yeah, go ahead, please.
Thank you. Thank you so much for the 4 presentations. I think they were very stimulating. I would probably focus not on Professor Marocco, but on the 3 colleagues, because to learn from their country's experience. The first one regards what we can do, because you talked a lot about the socio-economic context, which in many ways is a given for the educational system. But we know that, we can still make a difference, especially regarding the role of teachers and the attractiveness of the profession and the preparedness, scientific and pedagogical preparedness. So the first question would be, if you have a problem of attractiveness of the teaching profession in your countries, and if that's the case, what are you doing to make it more attractive? And I don't think that's only the issue of salaries and careers. I mean, there is an issue of social prestige of the teaching profession that I think is a challenge for many of our countries, so I think it would be very important. The second thing is regarding migrants. Some of you mentioned that, and this also can be brought into Professor Marocco, because we have a growing portion of children of migrants in our education system. And in many countries we know that the performance of these students tends to be poor because there are language issues, adaptation, social integration. There are many things. How are you dealing with this? I mean, do you have target programs to deal and to support these students, especially for those that come from countries that have very different language and cultural barriers? Thank you.
Yeah, go ahead.
I can start with the last question. We have state subsidies for these schools with both a high share of migrants and low socioeconomic background, and also special courses for teachers and professional program targeting them. The problem is, as I said, that not all schools have, if you have a heavy burden dealing with the everyday life, and you should also apply for state subsidies, we see that it's hard to target all those schools that should need it. So that was this with more find ways that also schools where teachers are really, and the principals have really heavy burden just with the everyday life, make what we could support them with easier to maybe that you can have digital courses on different levels. You could maybe have one teacher that come and work with and give extra support in the teachers among the teachers on the schools, so we work more differentiated, and that's what we're trying to do right now. So make it possible for the schools and the teachers to take the help they could get, in both in further education and in resources. We also have, since we know that if you are good at your own language, you are better also in Swedish and perform better in maths and other subjects. We still try to work with so the students are supported in their own language, but also there we have difficulties in getting teachers that have certificates teaching in this. So, and we are struggling with making the teachers' education and the teachers' profession the high stake that we want. But we are, right now, it's mainly this with diversification of salaries and career opportunities that we're actually dealing with. So we have a lot to do, I think.
I can just come in for Aaron briefly. So on teachers, I think kind of in terms of prestige and so on, I think teaching is actually seen as a relatively attractive career in Ireland. I think a lot of young people do go into teaching or want to become teachers. But we do have a fairly severe teacher supply shortage anyway, and I think there's a lot going into that. It's a very complex set of problems, but a couple of things that play into it are administratively, one of the ways the system is set up at the moment is it's quite hard for young teachers to get offered permanent positions in schools. A lot of the time teachers have to spend years taking a few hours in one school and a few hours in another school and part-time posts here and there, and it's very difficult then for them to settle anywhere, because especially in Ireland we have a lot of small rural primary schools that are quite spread out. So if you're offered, some hours here on Monday in one place and somewhere else 20 kilometers away the next day, and none of it adds up to a full-time job, what happens is a lot of people train in Ireland as teachers and then they emigrate to Australia or Dubai or somewhere where they can earn more money and get a permanent job and live in the sunshine. And I wouldn't blame them. So that means, despite having a lot of teachers getting trained in Ireland, it's hard to keep the supply. Another factor coming into that, and I think it's a good reminder that for all that we talk about policy making and what did the Minister for Education do and curriculum change and all these kind of things, there's a lot of factors outside the education system that also impact this. And one big thing in Ireland at the moment, and certainly for the last 10-15 years, is there has been a huge housing crisis. So it's very, very expensive to buy houses or to rent, and about a third of the population live in or around Dublin, and just a lot of certainly young teachers and the ones who can't get permanent jobs can't afford to rent in Dublin for prolonged periods or live in somewhere like that, and they can't buy a house. So again, even though schools want teachers and teachers want jobs, we can't kind of get it together at the same time, and that's partly for a factor that's sort of unrelated to the education system, but it's just a much bigger social problem that goes well beyond that. On the kind of students who have migrated into Ireland or from families that have migrated in, the pattern is similar in Ireland. Kind of students who don't speak English or Irish at home tend to do less well on the tests by and large. There has been a lot more investment in Ireland over the last, again, probably 10 or 15 years. Like, Ireland has changed quite a lot, I'd say, over the last 20 years, from being a very homogenous country to, I'd say now there isn't a school in the country that doesn't have 20 or 30 different languages in it, and more in a lot of schools. So there's a lot more kind of teaching assistance and learning support in schools than would have been the case a few years ago. So I think the spending on education in Ireland is still quite low compared to a lot of countries, but it has gone up a lot in recent years, and a lot of that has gone into teaching assistants, and a lot of what they would do would be working with students kind of in the classroom while the teacher is teaching to sort of help them along, and that's not all with students who don't speak English or Irish, but that's part of it. And just one other thing I'll mention briefly is the DESH scheme that I mentioned, which accounts for about 2/5 of schools. It's the designated disadvantaged schools that receive extra supports. There would be a higher concentration of students who come from kind of non-English Irish speaking backgrounds in DESH schools, and one aspect of the supports that DESH schools get, which I think has been quite well regarded and quite successful, is a homeschool community liaison person. So there's someone in the school whose job it is to basically establish kind of a link and maintain links between the school and the home. So they go out to people's homes, and this is also partly because in DESH schools there'd be a much higher proportion of families who, you know, the parents didn't complete secondary or sometimes complete primary education, and there might be quite low literacy levels and so on. So these people go out, the homeschool community liaison officers, and they kind of maintain links and engagement, and then they can help support students and their parents and families sort of where it's needed, because they know what's going on in the home context probably to a greater degree than a teacher or a principal could if you didn't have that sort of link into the home. So that's kind of some of the things that I suppose are being tried to keep those students engaged and progressing.
Great, I'm happy for Ireland. We have teachers. We don't have. It's in Estonia, the teaching profession is not so popular in terms for young people to decide that this is going to be my teaching career, because you have to study 5 years. We do have to have a master's degree for being a teacher, and after that the salary maybe is not as good as if you would get in other professions if you have studied 5 years and got a master's degree. However, we are trying really hard to have different approaches. For example, we do have Teachers Gala every October. We celebrate Teachers Day, and we invite all schools from all country to submit candidates, and then there is a huge, it's by the way on TV, online, live TV show, and all the teachers get to dress up nicely and see who is going to be the teacher of the year. And there are very different categories, and I think this is something, it's done by the European Union money, but it's again to promote the teacher profession, to tell them that you are very special, and I think that is it has risen the value of teacher, being a teacher in the society. We are also suggesting maybe there are some other ways of how to attract teachers. For example, if I am a mathematician or engineer or something, maybe I can go and be at school for 2 days, do my best, teach inspiringly children, and then make money somewhere else for the rest of the week, and so have some kind of part-time solution. So there is maybe not some very standard approaches as well how to be a teacher. But in overall, we have good news, like for the kindergarten teachers, that young people want to go and study that. But for example, mathematics and STEM subjects, that's a problem. And talking about migrations, because we're so much far in the north and it's so cold, and we are not as generous as Sweden is, we don't have so many migrants from from Africa, but we did have a lot of Ukrainian students, and that really showed, we got as many students as we would have one cohort of first graders. So basically, for the size of Estonia, it was quite enough. And it really opened up the generosity of people's hearts, and they took in, and they are integrating very well. And so 2 years later, we have 2 Ukrainian schools, and many kids are already speaking some Estonian. And so in that sense, that was our contribution for that question.
Those arriving before they are 10 years old, just in 5 years, they actually catch up. Yep. So I also think that shows that what teachers do, what you do in school, actually it matters, and that gives hope.
Okay, very well. Any more questions? Well, take your chance now or shut up forever. Nope. Okay, so thank you so much for being here this afternoon. I think we are, 25 minutes after the hour. Apologize for that. Let me just thank my colleagues in the panel. It was really great to hear you once again, for some of you. And so we have dinner tonight. Isabel, you want to say some final words for today, or can I just dismiss the class? Class dismissed. See you tomorrow then. Thank you.